Welcome everyone. This webinar will begin shortly. It will begin in about 2 minutes and it will be recorded. So as you're coming into this webinar, I encourage you to introduce yourself into the chat. We want to encourage everyone also to share what you're hearing and learning during this webinar. Share it on the Campaign for Grade Level Readings, Twitter and Facebook make sure that you use the hashtag GL Reading and the hashtag Funder to Funder, as well as tag, if you're using Facebook, the campaign at Reading by Third, or on Facebook, the Campaign for Grade Level or for GLR. Just a few quick housekeeping tips as folks are entering the webinar. Specifically, like I said, if you're entering in, introduce yourself in the chat box. All attendees are going to be in listen mode for now. And so if you have a question, please use the Q&A box to enter your question. This webinar will be recorded and made available to folks and participants, so look for that in the email following the webinar. And at the end of this session, there will be a brief evaluation asking that you please fill out that survey. As a reminder, GLR Learning Tuesdays are every Tuesday for now, and the next ones that are coming up are August 18th around after school opportunities, as well as August 25th, Elevating Parent Voice. So we hope that you will join us for those sessions as well and continue to introduce yourself in the chat. I'm going to hand it over to Miriam to get us going.
Well, thank you very much, Natalie, and welcome to everyone. I don't know if it's as warm where you are as it is where I am in Portland, Maine, but a warm welcome to everyone. I'm really so happy that we are here, and Natalie, you can go to my slide in which I really want to welcome everyone to this rural-focused webinar. We've been working on this for a long time, and I really am grateful to Hetty and Cecilia and the Attendance Works crew for partnering with us on this and in this work. I wanted to say a little bit about why we are putting on a webinar focused on rural communities. And those of us who spend a lot of time thinking about and working in rural communities could answer that question easily. But I wanted to lift up the fact that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading is really all about community solutions. And community solutions reflect their place. And therefore, it seems important to us to have an increasing amount of content in the campaign, both this special session and additional special sessions, and weaving rural content into the ongoing series of webinars that Natalie just mentioned. So I'm really so pleased that you all chose to join us, and you're in for a treat. You're going to hear from some wonderful rural presenters in a little bit. Now, people might ask, what do we mean by rural? And I will say that that's probably not a question that most of you on the call who are in rural communities would ask, because I sort of feel like rural is in the eye of the beholder. And it may look different to different people, but if you're rural, you know it. I grew up in North Dakota. Not a lot of people know that I did grow up, well, if I grew up, I did it in North Dakota. I was born in the small town of Devil's Lake in the middle of the state, but I spent most of my growing up time in Fargo. Now, to the rest of the world, Fargo looks rural, but to the rest of North Dakota, Fargo looks urban. So it's a little bit, rural is where you sit or where you stand. In general, you know, ranges from the far edges of metropolitan places to open country, from small towns or regional gateways to frontier areas. It might look different, but it's generally places with smaller population densities and more wide open spaces. I forget who is credited with a quote, when you've seen one rural place, you've seen one rural place, but they really do vary. And so it's important to remind ourselves that rural is not any more monolithic than urban or suburban. You know, the Norman Rockwell bucolic landscape dotted with sweet family farms it doesn't exist, or it may, we probably could find such a place somewhere. But it's countered by the reality that fewer than 5% of rural people work in agriculture, for instance. Nor is the red state stereotype any more universally applicable to rural places. It's hard to lump rural places together. But since none of us can probably visit every rural place and try to understand it, I particularly like this framework that Mill Duncan, the wonderful rural sociologist, came up with a number of years ago, to think about 4 kinds of rural places and the ways that they, the ways that these different places reflect different economy, culture, history, community dynamics, the role of education, and other characteristics. So one of the ones that she talks about is amenity-rich places. These are places that tend to have a mountain or a big water, or even better if you have both mountains and large bodies of water. Broadband increasingly is being seen as an amenity, but these are places that, these are amenities that make them destinations and homes of choice for baby boomers, for young professionals, and increasingly for what people refer to as digital nomads. They're high quality of life places that people seek out. Another kind of rural place are places of declining dependency on natural resources. These are places that historically depended on extracting and then manufacturing from natural resources like timber or mining. These industries supported strong blue-collar communities, but now those resources are depleted or being depleted, and globalization has made those economies and those industries much shakier, and those economies are in decline. And then another kind of rural place are chronically poor. These are places that are rich in history, but that history is typically one of devastating hardship and generations of underinvestment and disinvestment. And then the 4th category is there are a number of places that were at one time resource dependent on natural resources and natural resources extraction. And those economies are waning, but they're finding ways to build amenity-based economies. So the community in Western Maryland that built a man-made whitewater rafting course that's giving them an amenity-based economy where their natural resource extraction economy has waned over the last few decades. And so that's not the only way to categorize rural areas, but hopefully it gives you a helpful handle as you think about the places that you're going to be hearing about this afternoon. It's now my pleasure to hand the baton to Hetty Chang. Hetty, as I think everyone knows, is the Executive Director of Attendance Works. Hetty has spent more than 3 decades working in the fields of family support, family economic success, education, and child development. Now, I will say I may have been in the room when or very quickly after Ralph Smith and Hetty Chang first talked about chronic absence. And Hetty may tell you that I encouraged her on this path, or on certain days she may blame me for getting her into this. But what I remember is the way her eyes lit up when she started to think about really what you could do if you focused on attendance and chronic absence. And so I've loved watching how she has made all of that she envisioned back then, how she has made that come to fruition over the past several years. So Hetty, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And while I say a little bit more about that strategy, what happened there and why I'm so glad here, I'm going to actually invite Sarah to post the poll so that we get a sense of who is in the room today. And then while you're adding in your information, I'm going to say, so that was a conversation in 2006. You know, sometimes certain conversations change the trajectory of your life. And that conversation with Ralph Smith certainly did, with Miriam saying, Hetty, Ralph really needs help on this one. Go work on this. And so what became a little consulting project became my life's work with all of you. What I really also would say is that It is amazing to see who all is chatting into the, or adding into the chat. You know, we have folks from Virgin Islands to Oregon to Indiana, you know, in every place in between to here in California. So we have many different kinds of rural. Why don't we take a quick look and see who is on the webinar? Sarah, do you want to do that? So we've got many educators, a few nonprofit partners, though, where they're in a big mix. And one thing I'll do before we move into what is chronic absence, I want to acknowledge, thank you, nonprofit partners, some funders, others. Now we can take that away. I want to acknowledge that the work of Attendance Works is premised on the fact that what we try to do is provide overarching concepts that each one of you have to take and tailor to your own realities. So really having a clear picture of your realities, like the ones that Miriam pointed out make up rural America, is essential to doing this work well. And what we'll have a chance to do is think about how these concepts, which I'm going to talk about generically, really look and how they can be taken on in practice in a rural setting. So first of all, the common overarching concept here is chronic absence, which we define to support prevention, early intervention, and it's really missing 10% of school for any reason, including excused, unexcused suspensions. Next slide. And the reason why, nope, the prior slide, we thought this was important and why the Campaign for Grade Level Reading became involved in this is we realized this was a huge challenge. That was the initial work to identify that it was as much as 1 out of 10 kids, that many families don't understand, that early absences can add up to academic risk, that it was particularly affecting our most vulnerable kids and contributing to an equity and achievement gap, and it is heavily affected by health-related issues. Next slide. We also know, this is more recent work, that absenteeism is a sign that positive conditions for learning are missing for students and families. And that is true, and I'm gonna make this case whether it was in person, which was when we first developed this visual, or distance, or blended. Because what we have to do, given all the changes that are happening in our environment now, is understand we can still build upon key concepts that we already know. We know that kids and families, in order to show up to school, need to feel physically and emotionally healthy and safe. And if we close schools because we wanted to keep families healthy, then we're gonna need to make sure schools are healthy and safe when we reopen them. Families and kids show up to school, whether that's virtual or at a distance, when they feel belonging, connection, support. When you feel academic challenge and engagement, when the adults and the kids around you can put this in place. The challenge we have before us in all communities, and including in rural communities, is ensuring these positive conditions of learning are recreated in distance learning or in blended learning and maintained when we are back to in-person school. Next slide. And what we know is that the more kids miss school, the more intensive the supports they need. And if you have a lot of kids missing school, it means you have to really, really invest in Tier 1. I'm also going to suggest, and our colleagues here will talk about what they do, Tier 1 is more important than ever before. We are at risk of having so many kids not show up because they don't sense this connection to school. We don't, that we have to rebuild ways to create positive relationships. We actually have to recreate ways to monitor absences. And then if we notice kids falling off, that personalized support is going to be essential. Kids show up to school when they know someone cares. And the more you see kids not being in touch with school, the deeper the personalized connection and support will be needed in order to get them to school. Next slide. We also know that we know what a key systemic approach to reducing absenteeism is. This was true before COVID, it is true now. We have to have actionable data, positive engagement, strategic partnerships, shared accountability, and capacity building. And I don't mean shared accountability in the sense that, you know, it's an accountability metric in a state data system. It's that we as a community feel that this is all of our responsibility, which has been always the heart of what the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has been about. Next slide. We also know that prior to COVID, there was an amazing wealth of action taking place in grade level reading campaigns across the country to put in place these key ingredients of change. And we got all of these, and many of them were showing measurable progress. They were using evidence-based practices. Next slide. These are the attendance story systems that we had got before. Many of them were focused on positive engagement. Some of them were working on the actionable data and the capacity building and the strategic partnerships and the shared accountability. If any of you joined us for the webinar that we had done earlier in the summer, you know, we saw, for example, in rural Appalachia, how the United Way of Southwest Virginia had managed to put all these resources online to allow people to have the capacity to do the work, had used mini grants to create actionable data. There's a wealth of information already in the campaign about how you can carry out these activities. Next slide. And as we move forward into this new era that we're entering as a country, one of the things that is comforting to me is to know that this is not all about inventing something new. It's about leveraging what we know and adapting it to new realities. We already know that a whole child family approach is essential, and that parents, you know, I know Yolo is here. She and Ralph talk about parents as the secret sauce. They remain the secret sauce. If anything else, they're everything about a dish. Nothing is going to move forward without parents. We have to integrate virtual and in-person learning. And if we're talking young kids, that means having parents part of that integration and equipping parents to do that virtual work. We have to address inequitable access to resources, and we have to continue to focus on attendance, which frankly, in many places, attendance stopped being taken. So we have to reinstitute the practice of daily attendance taking. And we have to take integrated approaches. Next slide. One of the things that we have been starting to advocate as an organization is to get people to really go back to using data-driven practice. And we have to expand the ways we think about monitoring attendance so we have more tools to understand what it will take to ensure students can show up to school. We have to look at who was chronically absent in the past, for whom did we lose contact information, who doesn't have connectivities, who doesn't have relationships to schools because relationships is what will bring them in, and where you have little or no participation. And we need to continue to monitor when there's little or no participation. So as soon as we start to lose contact with a child or a family, we can start to use our relationships to bring them back into the fold and make sure that we know what are the barriers or challenges. And this is what will allow us to ameliorate the worst impacts of COVID-19, particularly for our most vulnerable students. Next slide. I also think there are some considerations. We have had the privilege, particularly through our partnership with the campaign and working with people in lots of rural settings. One of the benefits rural settings have is a strong sense of community. And I believe that will really help you as we move forward. Community is what will keep us together, help people survive, and help make sure that we draw upon all the assets to get kids to school. At the same time, it's really important to recognize the challenges that sometimes come when you're in a small town. People have lots of preconceived notions about families. We got to figure out a way to work through them so that those preconceived notions don't create barriers to allowing students to grow and families to flourish. We have to look at those barriers related to health and transportation, and we need to continue to explore technological solutions. I understand internet connectivity can be a real challenge in rural communities. But if you have large distances to travel, then putting in place internet can really expand your ability to reach folks. And the other thing that's a real value of rural is regional collaboration. Because often people know each other, and it means they can draw upon all those assets. Okay, these are our overarching concepts. Now, the really fun part of this webinar is to bring together all of our panelists who are gonna really make real and bring alive. So we have a couple of folks, and we're gonna go from starting with Allison in Mississippi. I have had the pleasure of knowing Allison now for a number of years, when she started off as an attendance officer in Oxford and really was one of the first people in Mississippi to really get this issue of chronic absence at attendance and help move forward her community. Then we're going to be joined, and actually Allison's going to go last. So we're going to do these introductions, and then we'll do a reverse order presentation. Our next set of speakers, Ramona Halcomb and Aaron Helgren, are from Oregon. And they represent two different kinds of situations, or probably more than two, of rural, what it is to be rural in Oregon. Ramona, who's just been amazing. She's been with the Oregon Department of Education and is the person who leads the tribal attendance pilot practices and promising practices program. I knew it in a different name, and I'm trying to keep the new name in my head. So Ramona, correct me if if I didn't get that right when you speak. But she will bring to you the knowledge she's gained from working with tribes across the state of Oregon about how to really take a culturally, linguistically grounded and intentional approach to getting kids back to school. And Aaron is the early work site liaison. This is the amazing work of the Children's Institute, which took on the challenge of saying, we're not just gonna talk about taking a 0 to 8 approach, we're gonna make sure it works and use the test of, can we do it in these communities, both rural and urban, to inform what we do statewide in policy. So Aaron is the site person with Yankala, and I so appreciate what she'll bring to that. And now I'm gonna go to our next two presenters who are actually gonna lead us off in talking about what this looks like. Susan Lieberman, who is the director with Count Me in Maine. I feel like, Susan, we got to grow up in this work together. Susan started this as soon as she started seeing the work from Attendance Works, and she's a testimony to how you can take our work, tailor it, make it real, and grow the concepts in ways that I could have never imagined. Susan is such an innovator. What a pleasure to have here. And Angela Madigan is one of the principals who works in a district, Waterbell, and her school, Waterbell Elementary School, who worked with Susan to take this work and really bring it into practice at a school site where over the course of a number of years, they made it real, even despite initial resistance. So I'm gonna let them tell that story. And with that, Susan, can you start us off by telling us a bit about Maine and about the top 1 or 2 strategies that have really worked?
Hi, I'm Susan Lieberman with Count Me in Maine, and it's hard to just talk about 1 or 2, but I'm going to try to limit it. We were established, Count Me In was established in 2013 to address the growing concern of chronic absenteeism in Maine, especially for our younger students. It was a grassroots effort. An amazing group of stakeholders worked together to create Count Me In with a lot of input from families and students. We partner directly with schools to provide technical assistance, offer professional development sessions that are open statewide to anybody who wants to attend, and advocate for systemic changes. Our focus is to build capacity within schools and the community so more students have access to learning opportunities and the needed supports so that they can succeed. We really believe in that whole school, whole community approach, and data guides us from the beginning as a baseline, during the process, for a point in time, and annually to reflect on what we can learn and understand what didn't work and why, as well as what was successful. And I want to reiterate what Hetty said. We turned to Attendance Works from the very beginning, and we are very grateful for all that they have and continue to help shared with us. And we have worked hard to adapt those tools to Maine and rural communities. And over the years, with support from Maine schools, we've developed some of our own tools. We also had to look at the research that we found through AttendanceWorks, and we had to then create our own studies using Maine data so it was relevant to Maine communities. So we have great admiration for those people in Johns Hopkins and at University of Chicago and in California, but they weren't necessarily talking about Maine kids. And so we had to look at our own data to just confirm. And also, as I said before, make it relevant and identify our areas of concern. We work in schools that range from 120 students K-8 to 700 students in an elementary school or a high school. So in this first slide, you can see it's the main overview, but it's capturing what Hetty had said. And what we're talking about is that positive, that tier 1 is so important, that positive engagement and conversations about attendance, learning, and that working as a community, that community building is so key to the work. And it's done throughout the year. It's not just once a year. It incorporates the positive teacher outreach and the monitoring of student data, establishing a review structure. I'll talk a little bit more about that, implementing those data-driven interventions and incorporating partners. And what we found is doing our own research is that you really have to do the first 3 steps to really see bigger changes in the chronic absentee rate. And that's what we found over time. But then the question after looking at the main overview was really, how do we do it? And mainly, it's really a series of steps. So we mainly shifted our approach, pun intended. And as I said, it's really a series of small steps that result in big changes. So these are divided into 3 categories. It's talking about working conditions, reflect on beliefs and assumptions, and changes in our approach, partnerships, and actions we can take. So oftentimes in the working conditions, we often in rural schools work in isolation due to staffing and funding limitations. So we have to transition to a team, and what does that mean? And we actually developed a rubric because we wanted to see, what does that mean to shift your responsibilities in terms of a team? How do you go from one person presenting and that person's expected to come up with a solution to a team actually brainstorming, sharing the parent and student perspectives, looking at those strengths, connecting with the classroom teacher, brainstorming, and then continually monitoring those strategies. That was really key to learn how to do that and build that in. The next thing is those assumptions and beliefs. In a small rural town, it's easy to make assumptions because we think we know everyone. And if you know the aunt, then you know her nephew. And so what we had to shift from was what I think I already know to what I think I can understand better about the family or the student's perspective. And what we heard from teachers was, I didn't realize, or now I understand, or now we have a connection. I didn't realize they liked something I liked, and now we have that personal connection. But that was really an important transition. And the last part was that change in action. And oftentimes what the punitive approach worked for the aunt, so probably it'll work for the nephew. And instead of looking at it in terms of a punitive approach, how can we look more positive and build on that positive partnerships? So it meant developing a protocol for consistent approach. It meant looking at those systemic barriers. Sometimes we looked at in some rural communities, we could look at a walking school bus to the school bus stop, which was very effective. In other places, we had to look at how do we coordinate with medical offices so that there could be better communication and there was smoother communication. And the other piece that I thought that was also really important was how do we transform our school climate and culture? So intentionally addressing that student to student, staff to student, and the topic that's most overlooked is the staff to staff relationships. So we had to incorporate, how do you incorporate that FAIR process? And I will say that one school that exemplified a lot of this work is Waterboro Elementary School. So, and I've been honored to work with Angela and her team who actually have taken a lot of these ideas and taken them to the next level.
So Angela, you're on. Tell us how this works in practice at a site level.
Absolutely. Thank you. Angela Madigan, principal at Waterboro Elementary School. If you see the map here, we're in southern Maine. We have about 8,000 in our 3 towns that make up Waterboro, East Waterboro, North Waterboro, and Waterboro, with about 60 square miles of land. A unique consideration for our area, as was said earlier, that rural areas aren't all the same, they're very different. In our area, back in the 70s, we have a lot of lakes, and we had a large developer come in and build all kinds of housing, thinking this was going to be a resort community, a place to get away. And then the money disappeared and everything kind of fell apart. So we were left with a large community of housing that was unfinished and cheap. So it brought in a certain population into our area. With that population is a lot of transiency, poverty, and all of those things that really affect our school and do in many rural communities. So that's a little idiosyncrasy of our community that we have to constantly consider as we do our work. We also have close to 50% free or reduced lunch beneficiaries. Back in 2015, we started our partnership with Susan Lieberman and Count Me In. We had a great team, and our school itself was just going through a change in leadership. New things were happening. We were moving forward. This new initiative felt very uncomfortable at first for a lot of teachers. They still had that mindset of punitive, of truancy, of it's not my job to ask about attendance, to connect with families. That's the administrators or the counselors' roles. So that was our first barrier, and really getting teachers to warm up to the fact that we were not having them check in on attendance. What we were doing is asking them to build relationships with families. And even that was a struggle because they didn't know how. So we had to go back to the basics and actually teach them how to build relationships with families. It's a phone call, it's an email, it's something positive. If you're noticing that Johnny was out a couple of days last week, let's pick up the phone and just say, hey, we miss Johnny here at school. How are things going? Just making that connection will start to build the relationship. And a lot of teachers still struggled. So we created some scripts that they could use when they were on the phone to have some sentence starters and get them comfortable. We had modeling, we had counselors sit with them and do it with them. So building those really positive, powerful relationships was our first step. It took off when teachers started talking to each other about what they found out. You know, one teacher would go down the hall and say, oh my goodness, remember little Johnny was out 2 days last week. I found out something really important about his family, and now he's going to be in school, and we're able to get over that hump, and we've made this connection. And a teacher would hear that and say, oh, well, I wonder if little Susie has something going on, and then they might make the connection. So really sharing those positive personal stories that were happening within the school organically built up that culture in our school. Another thing we did is create the attendance teams that Susan spoke to. We have attendance teams that pull data, that pull students who are chronically absent, truant, and approaching chronically absent, so that we have various stages or tiers of interventions we can do for those students. That team is made up of our counselor, nurse, administrator, and representatives from grade levels who are the liaisons who go back and forth to bring that information to their team and which students need to have that connection and what do we know about that family? How can we help that family? Another thing that the team did with that data is create an infographic. And that infographic was used in a staff meeting to show them the results. Like, this is the data, this is it, the proof is in the pudding, you are making a difference. And we took the student name off, but we chose students from various grade levels. This one happened to be third grade. And the interesting thing about this one, why I chose this one to highlight, is it's not just absent. This one happens to be tardies. So we looked at total time away from school and not just complete days or whole days. And looking at these students and their growth in academics and their growth in participation and engagement and emotional and social health was just powerful for our staff. And it was a real turning point for them to say, okay, we're all in. We're going to do this. They saw the data, they saw it was working, and we had that culture shift where they knew that relationships mattered. They knew that it was their job, and they knew that families are the foundation for our students' well-being and access to learning here at school. So we have gone from 2015, almost 9% chronically absent students, down to about 3.1 in 2018, 2019. So we have seen the results. We'll get into what it looks like now, but they are really just reaching out, and that community that is all built in that little idiosyncrasy I talked about earlier, they are telling each other how Waterboro supports them and how they give them resources and how they're supporting their needs and getting their kids what they need and helping their families as a whole family. So leveraging that strong sense of community was another really big piece that we nailed down to create those powerful, positive relationships at Waterboro.
Angela, that is such an amazing story. And the one thing I would add is when you and I had a chance to talk about this earlier, you had talked about how you went from parents wondering, why are you calling me? What did my child do wrong? To parents reaching out to teachers saying, haven't heard from you in a while.
Absolutely. And the culture shift wasn't just in the school, it was in the entire community. So they were happy to get those positive phone calls, and it shed that positive light on our school and turned their culture around. And now they were calling us, which has definitely helped in the current situation we're in. So we're very proud of that.
Well, thank you so much. Angela and Susan are going to come back. This is a process, and we're still here for a bit more in this webinar, but we are now going to shift from Maine to Oregon. We'll run them all the way across the country. And if we can go to the next slide, because I'm going to invite Ramona to talk about Oregon and how chronic absence became a priority issue for the tribes and what you've done about it. What are the top couple strategies?
Well, thank you, Hetty, for inviting me. And don't worry about getting the name mixed up. I still call it Tribal Attendant Pilot Project, as you can see on my slide. We changed the name to Promising Practices. And it's been well known that both Oregon and our sister state, Washington, have had chronic absenteeism as a huge issue. Our Native American educators instinctively knew that our students were not getting the outcomes that they desired. However, in 2013-14, we had a study done by Education Northwest and the Chalkboard Project, where 7 of the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon gave their actual enrollment data to ODE, the Department of Education, to match up. And with that data, we were able to see a number of things, but I'll concentrate on absenteeism. If you were tribally enrolled in Oregon, you were chronically absent 33% of the time, compared to 19% of their peers. So our government-to-government education cluster, comprised of all 9 federally recognized tribes, advocated with this data for funds, which established TAP. TAP is a school-wide initiative, so it has the possibility to impact all students. Next slide, please. So each TAP site is unique, and it centers on tribal educational sovereignty. They co-construct a job description for a family advocate. They co-construct strategies that will help reduce chronic absenteeism. I think it's important to know that the tribes also approve of the applicant pool that the district has. And this is so that the tribes know who can work with their students in a good way, who's from, of, or knows the community well enough to work with our students in a caring way. So some of the efforts that they have had is, as we've heard, one, caring adult. Next slide. And another area that one of our TAP sites did in Pendleton was to infuse language. And I just love the way that the signs you can see are in English, they're in Umatilla, and they're in Braille. And I still remember the day I was sitting in the principal's office talking about some of the past history of boarding schools and taking away our language and why it might be difficult for tribal families to feel comfortable in school. And they said, I want our families to know they're welcome from the moment they enter our parking lot. So you can see on Washington Elementary, right there, it says welcome in Umatilla. Next slide, please. By having the tribes co-construct strategies, that allows us to have events that families want to participate in. And when I was at Umatilla, it was hard for me to get 4 or 5 families to come out and listen to something. But after TAP, there's 44 families consistently coming out because they're providing something the families are interested in, something that is relevant. And the families are not feeling like they're being judged, both in person and in writing. One of the things TAP did is look at the policies and the letters that we send home, and instead of shaming and blaming, we moved to a more, how can we help you? How can we remove barriers for you? Next slide, please.
Ramona, just before you move to the next slide, I just
Sure.
want to comment for folks who may not be as aware of these dynamics, but historically in the United States, Native Americans have experienced incredible atrocities at the hands of mainstream education. So there's high levels of distrust because there was a whole history of people taking Native American folks, putting them into boarding homes, boarding schools, trying to rip their language and their culture away from them. And maybe everyone understands that history. Maybe people realize how much we have completely never attended to tribal sovereignty in so many of our policies and practices. But I just want, just in case someone doesn't, they understand why all of the things you've just said had to be so explicit. Because where there's existing distrust, you have to actively build trust in ways that counter the discrimination and the oppression that happened before. And I just suddenly got worried that our 200 something people watching this webinar, I don't know how much, we're not very good at educating people about our own history and what has happened to the wide range of Native American tribes that exist into our country. So I just want to take that point of privilege and then have you continue, Ramona, so people truly appreciate the value of what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Hetty, for saying that. Another thing I'd add on to that is both my parents attended boarding schools. So if people do know about boarding schools, they often think that there's something historical, but they are very present. I say I'm a product of boarding schools because both my parents went there, and the way they felt about school influenced me. And that took a long time. I did not even earn my master's until 2011 because of this system. I didn't feel welcomed in the educational system. I didn't feel supported, and I definitely was not encouraged. And so now I feel like efforts like TAP is going to change that. We also have tribal history, shared history, which was passed and being implemented this year. So hopefully people will get a fuller understanding of who American Indian Alaska Natives are. Another thing TAP does is professional development. And here's a picture in the summer, 52 teachers and educators came to hear 4 hours about history of the Klamath tribes. And they did that on their own. And since then, not only have our relationships with families grown, but I believe our relationships with teachers and the tribal community has grown. And one of the things that I love most of all is they're having a whole child approach to problem solving, not only in school problems, but if somebody's homeless, if somebody needs food, they bring together their highest vulnerable students, and they problem solve community-based organizations, the tribe and the school district. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things out of TAP. Next slide, please. So the Oregon Department of Education, besides building capacity for our family advocates, we do an extensive marketing campaign. Here's some posters that we did of Native Americans. And I love the young man on the right in the cap and gown. He's one of 11 students, or one of 11 in the family. And his picture being in the elementary school, I can just imagine his siblings running up saying, "That's my brother." And then their friends saying, "That's my friend's brother." We also bring together role models. We brought together John Harrington, the first tribally enrolled astronaut, came and spoke. We've had hockey players, and we've had traditional dancers and rappers. So we are doing both from an Oregon statewide point, trying to do positive role models that will further help the local schools and tribes collaborate. So last slide, please. So TAP has seen a collaboration between tribes and the schools, increased family engagement, increased language, curriculum, and professional development. And we've had increased cultural sensitivity and more visibility. And as a result of all that, we've had positive attendance, even when our peers are increasing their chronic absenteeism. Absenteeism among Native Americans is dropping. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just going to highlight that one more time, which is we actually saw statewide increases in chronic absence at the same time TAP saw decreases in chronic absence among the participating tribes. So quite an accomplishment. And much of Oregon's tribes are rural. Which is why this is part of this webinar, and many of the rural communities in this country have Native American tribal groups. We're now going to go to a different kind of rural, but in the same state, and I'm going to ask Erin Helgren to join us and tell us about Yankala and what you were able to achieve there. And Erin, you need to unmute, otherwise the telling won't work quite as well.
There, thank you. I think that's going to be the catchphrase of this year is you need to unmute. But so this is our kindergarten class with one of our IAs that lives in the community. And I'll go ahead and advance to the next slide. So Children's Institute is a policy and advocacy organization dedicated to ensuring every child is prepared for success in school and in life. And to meet this goal, they advocate for strategic investments in early education and healthy development, beginning with prenatal care. And Children's Institute is really dedicated to understanding and leveraging the strengths and assets of every community, as well as lifting up the very real opportunities for change and addressing systemic barriers children and families face. And so part of growing this knowledge and this depth of understanding was embarking on 2 long-term site-based projects That includes the Earl Boyles Early Works Project, which is in Northeast Portland, and the Yoncalla Early Works Project in Yoncalla, Oregon. Next slide. So Yoncalla is a remote rural community in Southern Oregon with about 1,200 residents. About 200 students are enrolled in the whole entire district. There are high rates of poverty. We have 95% of our children receive free and reduced lunch. We have a lack of access to basic services, including transportation, medical, mental health. There's a lack of safe housing. The high rates of families and children experiencing food insecurity, and there are multiple barriers for children and families. And about in 2012, we were chosen to be the rural demonstration site for the Early Works Project. And when we began the project, the community, the district, and the teachers believed that children were behind before they even entered the school building in kindergarten. So in 2012, there was a leadership team that was developed that was a decision-making body to really be the catalyst for beginning the Yoncalla Early Works Project and identifying the information that the team would need to support growth and to support change. So let's see. Two of the things that were identified that the team would need to be able to embark on this project was they wanted to know more information about the community, about the needs and resources available to families already, the perceptions of teachers, and the strengths and needs of families. And so in 2012, in partnering with Portland State University, they conducted a community needs and resources assessment. And they developed some guiding principles. So next slide, please. So Early Works is guided by these 8 principles based on the understanding that children will be most successful if they have access to services that are universally available, driven by parents, built on community school partnerships, if they use data-driven decision-making and are focused on sharing a goal of school readiness and school success starting from birth. Next slide. So in our initial community needs and resource assessment, what we learned was that parents and community members reported a strong disconnect between the school district and most families. Many parents reported their own trauma and unmet educational needs in relationship to their perceptions around education, and more specifically, Yoncalla School District. In addition, staff and administration minimized the role of parents in the education of their children. And one administrator actually shared with us that the traditional model was that parents drop their kids off at the door and we take them from there. So building on that lack of connection to school, parents identified little interest in preschool. And again, school wasn't a safe place for most adults in the community, so they tended to rely on family or community for childcare needs because that felt safer. Families couldn't afford tuition at the private preschool, so they were charging $80 a month, and about 90% of our families identified that they weren't able to afford that. And it just quite frankly wasn't part of the culture to send your young child off to preschool. And parents didn't want home visiting. So the majority of families identified home visiting as an intervention for parents involved with DHS. And even though a small percentage of families were receiving home visits, they mostly remained under the radar. And so we did ask, like, what do families want? And what families wanted was they wanted free, fun things to do with their family, with their children. I always think of this as being like a pivotal decision of the leadership team, because I think that if we could easily identify things like preschool and home visiting as high impact strategies. And as the quote leadership team are quote professionals, we could have made a choice to head in that direction, even though the community was identifying that's not the direction they wanted to head in. And this was a time when the leadership team decided to listen to families and be responsive to families, and really probably for the first time in families' history in Yoncalla, listened to them and responded. And so we decided to do free, fun things with families. We did things like baby showers, play groups, free yoga classes, free events at the library for children and families. Next slide. let's see. So how did we build trust with families? We did things like shared the data with the parents and the community, and we asked questions around the data. What does this data mean to you? How can we use this data? We shared them in very community-friendly ways. We invited families to come to a community cafe with other community members and discuss it. We did an annual retreat, or we continue to do an annual retreat every year, where we invite every single person and every single child in the community to come and share learning and share goal setting. And then we also have monthly check-ins with the leadership team. We've redefined leadership from a group of decision makers to anybody that wants to lead as part of a leadership team. So we have parents, we have staff, we have support staff, we have the cafeteria staff, we have volunteers from the community, and sometimes we have up to 30 or 40 people in a leadership team meeting. The other strategy is that the school district worked with partners that were already successful with relationships in the community. And so for us, that was our library. She had buy-in and she had access to families. Family Relief Nursery was embedded in the community and had relationships. And then our Parenting Ed was a program that families were partnering with. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we saw things that were already successful and working and had some traction, and we supported the work that they were already doing. Next slide. So research tells us that the reason engagement and leadership is important is that it creates a partnership between family and school staff in support of children's learning. Things like parents feel like they can ask questions to the teacher, they come to the school and advocate for their child's needs, and they know what's going on in the classroom so they can support it at home, and most importantly, for later academic success. I wanted to share some of the strategies that we have developed over the last 5 years, including the pre-K parent engagement events, community-based family activities at the library, evidence-based parenting ed, parent-led activities, and community events. We've shifted from school leadership and staff making decisions to really committed to parents as partners. We have created opportunities for parents to sit on governance committees and plan community meetings based on their needs and their focus. And there's an emergent parent-driven leadership team that's collaborating with administrative leadership. Just recently, in the last year, we've made a decision to not make any decisions about the school district or the Early Works Project without parents in the room. I think, next slide. What some of the outcomes that we're seeing are that there are things like kids are being read to at a higher percentage, more families have books in their home, more families are feeling like the school is welcome, and there's incremental shifts in attendance. Next slide. I wanted to just share one of our slide highlights, and as you can see, it's incremental change, but it is slowly changing. One of the things that we chose to do was to really highlight those families that were definitely, we have families that are attending above the 90%, but then we also wanted to see how many families were close, how many families were between 85 and 90%, and so we could highlight that we're getting closer and closer to meeting our goals. Next slide, please. So where are we now? So again, going back to 2012, when we had families that were apprehensive about preschool and home visiting, we've gone from to having very few children in the community of Yoncalla enrolled in preschool to providing universal access to free preschool, full day preschool to 30 children. We have home visiting that is happening pre-K through 6th grade, and in some cases happening in the high school level. So we're recognizing that that strategy is something that both families and children are acknowledging as positive and wanted. And currently, the current district leadership, the administration, and the board are beginning to embrace those important guiding principles that Yoncalla Early Works has been founded on. And so instead of focusing on birth to third grade and using those strategies and those guidelines to mold programming for those families, we're actually looking at a district-wide approach using those strategies. Next slide. And just some pictures of kids. These are families and kids that are in classrooms that are working together. And then the next slide. And these again are more families and kids that are working together in Yoncalla.
Thank you, Erin. So appreciate, there's actually a lot of themes. Trust is a big issue, regardless of what community you are, and starting where people are at and what they say they want to do, and what will build that trust seems so key. With that, it is my pleasure to turn to our last panelist. And I will say we're going to come back to questions and answers. Afterwards, we have a chance to hear from Allison with Mississippi. Allison, tell us about Oxford and how this work unfolded, and what have you been your top key strategies?
Sure. Well, thank you, Hetty, and the campaign for giving me this opportunity today. I know I have lots of school attendance officers that are on this webinar, and so I do want to thank them for letting me share their story. But a lot of times they are forgotten and unnoticed, but they are the ones that are doing the work, and I'm sharing their story today, and I'm able to present some stories that they have shared with me. So next slide. Just due to time constraints, I'm going to let you have a copy of the slides. So I'm going to let you review the vision and mission and goals of MDE just at your leisure. So you can go to next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so most of my work as a school attendance officer was done in Oxford, Mississippi. It's in the northern part of the state. It's called Hill Country here. I know when we were developing our grade level reading campaign, that was part of our description. Our total population is about 54,000, and it just depends. We are a college town, so it does depend on your enrollment through our university here. So I serve 2 school districts, a county and a city school district, and we served about 9,000 children. And so you'll hear me reference LOU Reads. And so that was our grade level reading campaign that was established in 2013. And so you will see me reference that. And we served, LOU Reads serves both school districts. So I guess one of our first steps was to analyze our data and to see where we needed to work. So chronic absence is an early warning sign for many things, health concerns, family needs. And so we needed to know, where do we need to begin our work? And is there an area in our community that needed our work first? So you'll see that we tried to overcome the myth that school attendance is solely a school issue or a parent issue. And we tried to utilize strategies that build those relationships and engage our stakeholders. Next slide. So after we determined where and who needed us and our work the most, back, I think, a slide, sorry. The planning phase began. And so our top 2 strategies, the first one was to bring awareness to chronic absenteeism. So as Hetty mentioned, chronic absenteeism was fairly new in the state of Mississippi. And at the time that my work began, there were only 2 campaigns in Mississippi. And so I, being a school attendance officer, so in the, I think, olden days and the original days, they were truancy officers. So we had to reshift our focus. And even though chronic absenteeism, truancy is a part of chronic absenteeism, we needed to see why these kids were out of school, unexcused or excused days. You know, we had children that were suspended off the bus, did not have, reliable transportation to school, that they were missing these days. So we needed to create a culture of understanding that attendance every day matters. So awareness was our first strategy to the community. We also acknowledge and address some health-related challenges, and then we thought we needed to provide parents with needed resources that they needed and also bring an awareness to them of chronic absenteeism. Next slide. So our second strategy was to establish positive engagements. And with so much focus being on truancy and the punitive repercussions of truancy, we had to reshift and decided that we need to be on the preventative side of chronic absenteeism and truancy. So we began planning on what we could do to combine awareness and engage in positive relationships with their families. So we decided as a campaign to host several community events that would encourage attendance every day. So one of these events you'll see is breakfast at the bus stop. So we started this 3 times a year. We partnered with the Housing Authority. After we looked at data, we really looked to see where we needed to be within our community. Of course, the Housing Authority, the housing community was one of those places that we really put emphasis on. So we partnered with them. We did not, all we were there is for motivation and encouragement. We passed out breakfast. You can go to the next slide. Passed out breakfast from donations from our local restaurants. McDonald's in town was gracious to provide breakfast many times. And we were just there, like I said, to encourage families, you know, oh, I'm so glad to see you. Usually we did it on a Monday morning. Those to me are always the worst and the toughest to get up for. So great to see you. I'm glad you're here. Parents, you know, would walk and bring their kids to the bus stop. So we would see them, and then they could see us outside of that school atmosphere, you know, and that also as the truancy officer, I'm not the one that's going to, you know, always be across from you in a courtroom. I'm here if you need me. You know, let's try to kind of step back and reestablish those relationships. So we invited, as you can see, law enforcement. There's our assistant superintendent, members of our LOU Reads Coalition, and then also members of our school district's tech coaches came, because parents, we would answer questions as to whatever they may have at this event. So next slide. Another event that we held to engage positive relationships is preventative picnics. So like I said, being a truancy officer, we always talked about court and the punitive side of it. So what we did is we started looking at families, the ones that were habitually truant, you know, that are always absent. And so we contacted them probably 1st of July, and we met with them where they were. Some of them said, hey, come on to our house. They were not, you know, opposed to that. Some of them said, well, let's just meet at the park. So at this point, we partnered with PTAs in schools, just local community service organizations that were always looking to help, and of course our grade level reading campaign. And so myself, along with maybe a school nurse or principal, whoever wanted to go, we would meet these families where they were. And we tried to eliminate barriers that kept these families from coming to school. So we would take lunch. If we were at the park, the kids could play. We could have a real conversation with the parents, you know, less stress. It was an intimidating environment. And so what is it that keeps your child from school? Is it, we do not have a uniform here, but is it, you know, clothes? I know for me, you know, back to school is expensive. We've got technology fees and we've got new shoes and new clothes. And so let me help you meet you where you are. And so, like I said, we would get together and provide, you know, if it's back to school clothes, if it was backpacks, if it was lunchbox, let's have all this ready. You know, if it's even just an old school alarm clock that you need, you know, maybe mom's at work early in the morning and, you know, the 8th grader needs to get the family up. And mom takes the phone with her to work. So yes, let's do that. So, and also registration here is done online. And so we would take our laptops and we would go ahead and register those kids. Let's go ahead and register them. Let's apply for your free and reduced lunch. Let's, our residency documents, let me help you get those. I'll be happy to turn them in. So any barrier that kept those children from attending school at the beginning and even attending faithfully, we tried to eliminate those barriers from that family and just relieve, you know, some stressors that parents have, especially for back to school. So those were our two strategies. And so with that, and that's what I did here in Oxford. There are many things that our school attendance officers are doing across the state, that they have stories to share. And so we have seen a decrease in our chronic absenteeism rate. So I know that Mississippi went from almost 17% down to 13% last year. So our work is working. And so we're proud of it. And I'm proud of the work that our school attendance officers do daily to help those families.
Thank you, Allison. I think your story talks to the value of those personal connections, relationships, problem solving. It also connects that community events sometimes are the open door to those personal relationships. So you have to actually do the combination. It's both the tier 1 and tier 2. We are gonna talk about more in a moment about what has happened under COVID, but I wanna have a chance to, and maybe just go into questions for all the panelists, of which we have a few. And so if we, I wanna actually start back with you, Angela. This is going back to a question that was asked earlier, which was, how long did it take for your staff to change their mindset about the to impact school culture on attendance, and what role did the union play?
That's a great question. When this first came out and the assumption was that teachers are checking on attendance, the union was involved in that right away. When teachers felt that it wasn't their place to be doing that and they misunderstood what was trying to be implemented in the school and what the initiative was really about. And it was brought to the superintendent, the concerns were brought to the superintendent, and his response was, this initiative is about building relationships with families, positive relationships with families. And isn't that what's best for students? And don't we want what's best for students? And from that point, the bargaining unit understood that the initiative was not quite what some had assumed it was, and we worked together. That told us that we needed to build that bridge with them and talk to them about what this actually is, and built that bridge. But the overall change in culture probably took around 3 years to get most of our staff really on board, committed to this, committed to building relationships and reaching out on a regular basis, and sharing those positive results with others.
I'm curious, Erin, because I remember being in Yoncalla. How long did the change take place in Yoncalla?
So I would say, I mean, we're still evolving, but I would say that it was a solid 3 years before we really had engagement from parents, staff, and administration, but it continues to grow and evolve.
So now I have another question for all of you. There's a question, there was one comment earlier in the Q&A about the role of nonprofits. And so the challenge is having enough people to do the personal engagement and the relationship building for families that you know who are challenged. So my question would be, both generally, how have you all sought to have nonprofit partners or other folks beyond teachers who might not have the bandwidth to reach out to every single child? And then embedded in that also is, have you done any work with using older adults, like the 50 plus, the baby boomer age of which will admit to being part of, but I'm not retired. Some of my friends are starting to retire, but leveraging that capacity to ensure that you can really support kids and families. And maybe both, have you done that in the past, and are you looking at doing that under COVID? Anyone leveraging that power of other folks? Susan? Is that
in regards to the first question, we wanted to look at how we could incorporate the mental health system and how they would start to ask questions about attendance and really work with their clientele, kids and families. So we brought together some mental health agencies, and they were very willing to look at this. And we actually added an attendance indicator, a question about attendance, into the child case plan. And so that's reviewed every quarter. And what's asked is, how many days has the child missed school thus far this year? And so that promoted a great conversation between the caseworker, the clinician, the student, and the family. And then they could have that conversation and use either the student portal to get that information, or they could, with the parent's permission, make a three-way call and talk to the school counselor. And that promoted another form of conversation. And that way, each agency took ownership of it. And when it became part of their electronic monitoring system, it worked out even better. And now we're looking at how we can incorporate medical providers to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So you expand the number of caring adults by finding other partners for whom this is in their interest and putting the data in so that you can have that conversation.
So education becomes a community issue.
Absolutely. Other thoughts, use of volunteers, anyone been able to expand? Ramona, was that a?
Well, we don't have the volunteers, but we do have connections with the Boys and Girls Club, and we have other, we're fortunate, of course, to have the tribes partnering with our efforts. And so we too have community. One of my favorite stories is a Circle K called our family advocate and asked if there was school today, and they said yes. And they said, well, we have 3 kids down here. So they went down and got them. And so I feel like once you get the community involved, then you're really on track for making change.
Fabulous. So I'm going to now start to shift the conversation as we look towards next year. How does this work look under COVID-19? What are your plans? How have you been able to draw upon what you've learned? Susan, you want to, or Angela, either one?
Sure. As I mentioned before, those relationships that we built with families and the trust that we secured in responding to their needs and providing resources and that strong sense of community that they felt has really, it has made such an impact on dealing with COVID-19 and remote learning and all the things that we've had to endure through this time. And one of the biggest differences that I've noticed at our school that's even just different from other schools in our district is that parents are calling us to help with their needs. We are not just an academic institution anymore. We are a basic needs institution. And they know that, and they know we're willing to help. So we are helping our families get what they need to be safe, to have food, to have secure housing, to have those things that right now are topping the list rather than academics. And they come full circle when it is time to say, all right, we're good to go. Let's hop on and get some learning done. And they're there. And it's just a really powerful partnership that we've developed that's surviving even in times of crisis.
Susan, what would you add about the Maine context?
We did a survey. We do a staff survey every year, and we added some questions about COVID and people's responses to reaching out to families. And what we found was that 60% said it got easier. It was either easy to begin with because they already had the connection, or that it was challenging at first and then it became easier. And so that means that people are developing these relationships. The other thing that we asked about was what they gained in understanding about their students. And quite a few, it was over 60% acknowledged they had a better understanding of their students' life outside of school. And that's a really important knowledge base to have. And how do we build on that opportunity that now staff have this sudden relationship and understanding of students and where they live and connection to their families. So I applaud what Angela's doing, and I also want to note here that there's a number of educators whose kids attend Angela's school, and they are now bringing some of those ideas to their respective schools as well. So it does spread. But I do see this as a great opportunity to build on those relationships educators now have with families.
Great. Forewarning, I'm going to be turning to Oregon in a second. So Ramona and Aaron, but before I do that, I'm actually going to give a chance for us to start a poll, and then I'm going to actually ask Ramona. So folks who are in this webinar, if you might consider whether you might ever be interested in being part of a more ongoing community of practice focused on chronic absence. And then the other question, second question in that poll is, and if we were to be in a community of practice, do you want it to be broader, or do you want it to just be a rural community? You can think about that. You can answer that at your leisure. And in the meantime, I'm going to turn to Ramona and say, so what are your plans? What are you seeing happening with COVID? And I know, Ramona, just again to give national context, when I see is that Native American communities are so heavily affected by COVID. You might talk a little bit more about that as well as a context for also what you see the work happening with TAP.
Thank you. We are very fortunate. I'm not sure people realize Oregon was the first state to enact a government-to-government law. And so our Oregon Health Authority meets weekly by Zoom with our 9 federally recognized tribes. Our governor's office meets about every 6 weeks with our tribal education directors. And Director Gill has met twice with our Indigenous educators by Zoom and with students. I plan to have a student voice webinar at the beginning of when we start back to school. So we have a Ready School Safe Learners guidance on our website, and we have that an area for people to do feedback. And so they adjust that as they get responses, and they look at ways to help mitigate COVID-19. And so I feel very fortunate that between all of the government-to-government in meetings and with the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance and input, that Oregon is positioned very well for meeting the needs of our tribal communities.
Thank
and
you.
as far as, oh, I'm sorry. As far as TAP, I heard a wonderful group called Parents in Action, and they do a virtual home visit. And I plan to look further into that and train our TAP family advocates who there would be no TAP without all of their hard work. So we're going to look at ways that we can continue to reach out to our families in multiple ways. So thank you.
Thanks. Aaron?
So, I really believe that, our relationship building efforts have really, put us in a position to really be responsive to our families, and the distance learning piece. At the end of the school year, we were able to convene 3 groups of community members and families with a very strong family voice to really reflect on the distance learning, the pieces that worked for families, the areas that were challenging, and then also to think about planning for this upcoming year. Currently throughout the summer, we've had a very robust family voice and parent voice in our weekly planning, as looking at reopening and alternate ways of engaging and supporting families to learn. I think the other piece is this trust piece with the school district has really allowed the school district to identify those resource needs that families need and be responsive. And so we have done a district-wide food project where we're delivering groceries to families throughout the summer, and we're reaching 190 students, and we're pairing with our library to deliver books and learning supplies and to check in on families. And just, we're extremely isolated, rurally isolated in Oregon, and so to be able to have a touch point twice a week with families just to check in on children, I think it really is going to kind of set the stage for success in the fall.
Can I ask a question of Aaron or Ramona? Have you any plans right now where you might monitor data on who shows up in the first couple of weeks? I have this theory that the places that we're better able to establish trust, or the teachers or the institutions or the schools, will actually have higher attendance, whether it's virtual or in person or whatever the form, than if they didn't, because there's so much confusion. So if you have a relationship of trust, one, you probably are talking to someone who can tell you and explain to you, when is school and how do I get there, whether it's online or virtual or in person, and they're more likely to trust that school is a safe place. So just curious, either of you have ways that your communities are able to monitor that?
I don't know that we have a system set up at this point. I mean, I can tell you anecdotally, we do have families saying that if they were in another district, they would be apprehensive, but they trust our ability to keep their kids safe and to communicate. And we have opportunities for our superintendent and our principal to conduct either Zoom meetings with families that have questions, and families feel safe enough to ask the questions. I think that's the other important component. But again, I'm sure that we'll be monitoring. I know that that our superintendent will be asking teachers to monitor the online usage.
All right, thank you. And Allison, I'm going to add a question to you. In addition to talking about generally what you're thinking, there's been a question in the chat about after school and expanded learning. So as you respond, I would love to say generally, what are your plans? And at least in Mississippi, are there any plans for engaging and using, leveraging the power of after school and expanded learning providers as you're doing that work, or your early childhood providers?
Sure. So, but back to the, what is school, what is COVID, what are our efforts going to be this year? So when, I guess, Mississippi schools were shut down, I think March 23rd, our school attendance officers, most of them are in small town Mississippi. And so when you're talking about everybody knows everybody and everybody knows everybody's business, that's how it is. And so in a time of uncertainty, our school attendance officers were the only certainty that some families had. So they did reach out to them for Wi-Fi, like, where do I go to find Wi-Fi? What is Wi-Fi? So, just things like that, and delivering lunches and breakfast. They were so gracious to get out and just really be a volunteer to these families. Of course, at that time, there was a Mississippi attendance was not taken. So our attendance efforts at that point went away, but they came in a crisis mode and met needs, positive relationships. And so that's what we're going to continue to do, because we don't know. Right now, Mississippi is taking attendance when school starts back, and most districts have decided to, go back in person along offering virtual. So attendance is going to look very different, but we are going to continue with those relationships that we've established, because that's really all as attendance officers that we know is building upon that. So and so they were so gracious at this time. Most of our attendance officers have families of their own. And so here they are, trying to balance their own kids at home all of a sudden and help families that rely on them for, housing and clothing and all of a sudden you've got to wake up and you've got to feed a family of 3 meals a day. So partnering with the school districts to let them know where meal drop off was. So we will just keeping on. So home visits was in our, something that we did. So right now it may just be a drive-by, to check on students. And so with school starting back in Mississippi, we will continue to look for students who haven't shown up yet. So that really won't change. So, but as far as after school, I know here in our local community, we have partnered with the YMCA, and they are providing after school care. And so they are going to be handling that part, which I think is a great benefit to our community. I'm not sure that's just the one here that I'm familiar with. So, but they are going to continue with after school care.
And I do know that in many parts of the country, just to the person who asked that question, expanded learning programs, we shouldn't overlook the potential they have to provide supervised space, even when learning is virtual.
Yes.
But I think so that is an area worth much exploration. I know, Miriam, that it's about time to turn to you to close. We also have a poll. I'm going to defer to you as to whether or not you think we should show people the results of the poll and how you want to close out, but thank you for the opportunity to moderate.
The powers that be have decided to show the poll, and I think we should do that. Thanks everybody for responding to the poll. You know, I promised everybody a great session when I opened, and I think that you will see that I kept my promise. Thanks everybody for participating. There's a poll that's up now that we'd also like you to complete that helps us know what worked and maybe what didn't work as well on this webinar. And then I'd like to thank whoever it was who asked the question about after school opportunities, because you teed up the next webinar next Tuesday, August 18th at 3 p.m. There'll be a webinar focusing on after school opportunities, and the following week a webinar that will focus really broadly on the Learning Loss Recovery Challenge. I encourage everybody to register for those, and thank you all. Thank you to our presenters. A round of applause for Hetty and for all of our presenters and for all of the work you all are doing on behalf of our kids. Thank you, and be well, and have a great school year. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.